Good evening, everyone. I welcome one and all present here to the Science, Technology and Society panel, which is the fourth panel of our colloquium this year, and it aims to highlight the interplay between technology and society by employing different analytical lenses. Before beginning the presentations, I just want to quickly introduce our panelists. I feel honored to introduce the chair, Naveen of IIT, who will guide our discussion with his expertise and insight. His faculty at the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences at IIT Delhi. His research interest lies at the intersection of law, science, and technology studies. Next, I would like to introduce our first presenter, Vasundhara Bhojvaid. She is faculty at the Department of Sociology at Shiv Nadar University. The second presenter is Vidya Subramanian. She is faculty at Jindal Global Law School. Next, we have Richa Kumar. She is faculty at the Department of Humanities and Social Science, IIT Delhi. Lastly, we have Gayatri Nair. She is faculty at Department of Social Science and Humanities in the Institute of Information and Technology, Delhi. Our discussion for the panel is Madhulika Banerjee. She is faculty at the Department of Political Science, University of Delhi. Before our panelists begin with their presentation, there is just a piece of instruction that each presenter will have 15 to 17 minutes to present. The presentations will be followed by a comment by the discussion, and then we will open the session to questions and answer. We have kept a buzzer that will ring at the end of 15 minutes, and it would sound something like this. 15. I now hand over the session to the chair.
Thank you. Good evening all. Welcome to this session on STS, Science, Technology and Society, sometimes also termed as Science and Technology Studies. This is, we are doing this in some kind of a collaboration with the network which I was talking about yesterday, the STS India network. I think all of us are part of that network. And the idea is to unpack the different ways in which STS, Science and Technology Studies, as a domain which has emerged in the last 40-50 years, what are the ways in which that engages with notions of disciplinarity? So you have philosophy of science, you have sociology of science, but you also have an interdisciplinary domain where this works out in a particular way. So we are interested in trying to understand the opportunities and challenges through which we do this kind of work. So I think each of the presenters here have many years of experience doing it, and I'm very lucky to be chairing this session. And each of them come from different disciplinary vantage points, and also the areas in which they work are quite different. We see some parallels in the way they have tried to engage in their research, and many divergences as well. So I'm very excited to listen today to each of them. Thank you very much for agreeing to join. Shall I invite Vasundhara?
Okay, thank you Naveen and Madhulika for having me. And I do have a small PPT, and I'll take you through. So the title of my presentation, as you can see, is Understanding Human Atmospheric Relatedness Through Three Technologies. In 2015, I was back in Delhi after 2 years of fieldwork in villages in Uttarakhand. Almost 2 years after my return, the city had changed. There was something different in the atmosphere of the city which was leading to far-reaching, unexpected effects. For instance, during my morning commute to the library, as I turned on the radio to one of Delhi's most popular radio stations, the radio jockey blared every hour or so, Hawa Lat. The Hindi word Hawa Lat translates as a prison. If the word is broken into two parts, Hawa and Lat, it signifies a kick by the wind, insofar as Hawa means wind or air, and Lat means a kick. Let's return to the radio jockey calling out the word in a long and stretched manner to get the listener's attention, emphasizing and slowly elongating the word Hawa and abruptly ending with a forceful Lat to really bring home the potency of the kick we were all getting courtesy the air. To substantiate this claim, PM 2.5 or particulate matter levels of the city are recounted throughout the day, emphasizing that Delhi's air pollution levels are in the extremely hazardous zone according to the WHO guidelines, and listeners are encouraged to indulge in carpools and get their cars checked for pollution levels. I was struck by how I had lived in the city close to a decade by then, but never heard it characterized in such a way. Historians and social anthropologists have responded to the 21st century climate crisis anxieties by forging a new consensus that the gaseous layer enveloping the earth is not only an object of human knowledge, but a historical force in its own right, as an all-enveloping experience in and through which people perceive. This position is based on the well-established fact that though atmospheres have been present as undercurrents in anthropological engagements, it is only relatively recently that airy matters have become the main ethnographic focus of the anthropological lens. In using the word atmospheres, I rely on Matthew Gandy's exposition that in the social sciences and humanities, the concept of atmospheres, I quote, can simultaneously evoke both a body of air or simply even space along with its prevailing affective characteristics, unquote. With this context, as a social anthropologist engaged in the study of atmospheres, let me address how the contours of my progressing research have developed. In my work, I understand atmospheres as ecological formations that are encountered materially and created discursively while evading any form of human or technological capture. The air we breathe and live with continues to flow, drift, and swirl beyond any human-made boundary. In a primary sense, air is a form of matter. Here I rely on Karen Barad for theoretical explanation. Barad argues that the ontology of matter, while steeped in epistemic practices, matter and meaning remain inseparable. That is, air's materializations cannot simply be thought of as natural or artificial, but is rather to be understood as, I quote, constituted and reconstituted out of historically and culturally specific iterative interactions of material discursive apparatuses of bodily production, unquote. For Barad, matter, or more precisely phenomena, does not exist out there but is produced or made through apparatuses. Apparatuses are material discursive practices. They are not merely lab setups that embody human concepts and take measurements. They are boundary-making practices that are formative of matter and meaning. Apparatuses have no intrinsic boundaries but are open-ended practices. As an illustration, Barad analyzes reproductive technology, where she turns to ultrasound technology. The apparatus in question is not a simple observing instrument or a technological device. Rather, it encompasses a complex variety of material discursive practices, medical needs, design constraints, including legal, economic, biomedical, physics, and engineering ones, market factors, political issues, and the nature of training of technicians and physicians who use the technology. In a similar vein, I present to you two apparatuses and how they allowed for a comprehension of atmospheres. These two apparatuses will engage with the air filter, the air quality monitoring station, and the face mask that serve as material discursive practices for atmospheres. Apparatus 1, Havalat. Efforts to tackle air pollution in Delhi can be traced to the change of a diesel-based public transport system to CNG in the 1990s, and as far back as the colonial period, where the climatic conditions in India and the state of air and ventilation in homes were closely connected to colonial governance. That said, it was only in May 2014 for the first time Delhi became infamous for having become the most polluted city in the world. This infamy was achieved following the release of the WHO database detailing annual averages of pollution levels in cities across the globe. Since 2014, not only has there been increasing traction in science, policy, and advocacy on air pollution in Delhi and in other parts of India and the world, but the city of Delhi has consistently remained one of the most polluted cities globally. Historically, the quantification of air pollution was made possible through developments in science that converted air from matter to material. That is, there was a move from the individual sensorial perception of the quality of air in relation to place through smell, temperature, and movement to scientifically accurate standards that quantified the quality of air. Thus, air went from being a resource freely available or matter to a substance that could be tracked and manipulated with technology and hence became a material. The technological device that allowed for a transition of air from matter to material was the air filter, which remains seminal today in scientific assessments of air quality, such as the Air Quality Index. The AQI, or the Air Quality Index, is a weighted average that relates levels of pollutants in air to human health. The range of what good to severe levels are for the AQI is fixed by the national government and varies globally. This is done keeping in mind the state of air in a country, trends of air pollution, and designing realistic policy goals for improving air quality. The Central Pollution Control Board and the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change launched the Indian AQI in 2014. Since then, the AQI has become the barometer of air quality in a city such as Delhi. Interrogating this issue led to conversations with a WHO representative based in the Geneva office that was part of the team that compiled the annual database, officials from city pollution control boards in Indian cities, and a close engagement with the air quality data published on various platforms. These engagements revealed that the difference in city-level infrastructure and attempts to standardize and communicate air as an index are compounded at 3 levels: international, national, and city. Though based on official sources, international air quality data for cities across the WHO database vary in terms of the number of air quality monitoring stations in a city, their placement in cities, and different measuring methods. Furthermore, as mentioned earlier, the breakpoint of what qualifies as healthy air in India are not the same as it is for other countries, as you can see up there. Second, at the national level, it should be possible to compare the AQI level across cities in India. However, this is not entirely true. In order to get good AQI data, air quality must be monitored in real time, which is possible with continuous air quality monitoring stations. Most cities in India have manual air quality monitoring stations, which means someone must physically go to the station, take out the air filter, and then analyze it in a lab. Thus, data on air quality is often available weeks after the day or time that it represents. So even in Delhi, as you can see, we have a combination of continuous and manual air quality monitoring stations. Delhi has the maximum number of continuous air quality monitoring stations in the country, a total of 4040, which allows for an instantaneous calculation of the AQI. The city that comes second is Mumbai with 11 stations. Most cities have few continuous air quality monitoring stations, thus the same kind of AQI data is not available across cities. This means that in terms of air quality, Delhi generates the most real-time data in any city in India. Third, at the city level in Delhi, the continuous monitoring stations are not evenly distributed, and though the city has pledged to increase this number, there is an uneven distribution of monitoring stations that are a combination of continuous and manual. All 3 levels are further complicated as there is contestation over the factors that affect air quality in Delhi, which are a combination of local and transboundary sources beyond state and national boundaries as the air continues to move and drift. In other words, not only are particles such as dust carried from as far as the Gulf to make the air in Delhi, but in air's movements, particles and aerosols that mix and move within the city are carried off to adjoining and far-off regions. What we have then is an attempt to index air such that a particular identity is given to the city and how the air moves through, intermingles, and blows away. This is apparent through political and policy discourse, such as recent vote bank politics, coalitions in civil society and academic institutions to understand what is going on with the air in the city. And the state of air has now become a regular topic on print and electronic media. In this compositional worlding, human action is but one of the elements that compose the politics of the myriad place that escapes capture in any scientific or human-induced encapsulation and delineation. Apparatus 2, twindemic. I'm going to start from a quote from 2020 in a newspaper. Every year, as winter approaches and an acrid haze fills the sky, Jharna Sarkar fears for her health. This time, she's terrified. The 66-year-old retiree suffers from asthma that is aggravated by the severe pollution in India's capital. Now, a virus that makes people struggle to breathe is stalking her family. Sarkar's son and older brother were both infected with the novel coronavirus. Although her son recovered, her brother died in October. This year is particularly frightening, she said. Narratives such as these were strung across electronic and print media as the winter of 2020 descended on Delhi. Media reports used words like twin-demic and cautioned residents to hold your breath, it's still unsafe, to designate the possibility of being exposed to the deadly concoction of particulate matter and the novel coronavirus looming in Delhi's air. What sorts of airborne mutualities are encoded here? Face masks highlight two sorts of dynamics: airborne mutualities and body fortification. Prior to COVID-19, Nirvana, being a private company run by entrepreneur and pollution activist Jayadhar Gupta, popularly advertised its range of N95 and N99 masks that quickly sold out during the spell of the worst air quality in Delhi from November to February. All N95 and N99 masks made to combat air pollution come with a valve, which did not serve as good protection against the virus and led to Gupta launching a mask that protected the user from air pollution and the virus, the Aerific mask. So what you see on this side is a poster from Fortis Hospital in Delhi during COVID, and there's an X against two masks which are okay for air pollution, and they have a valve. But during COVID, the hospital was telling patients not to use masks with valves, but use masks without valves. Jayadhar Gupta, who has a small shop in Khan Market, and I've met several times, launched a new mask, the Aerific mask, as you can see, without an air valve. How does this implicate breath? Pre-COVID, the air pollution pandemic required masks that could filter what was being breathed in, but what was exhaled was not in contention, hence the valve. With the advent of COVID-19, what is exhaled through breath also became paramount. Thus, with the Aerific mask, breath must be filtered in and out of the body. In other words, airborne mutualities were rewritten such that intimacy through breath took on new meanings. Concluding thoughts. In my attempt to anthropologically make sense of atmospheres, I have learned that the intimacy we share with the air that envelops us has never been stronger. Timothy Morton uses Sartre's notion of viscosity to explain this sort of a relationship. For Sartre, viscosity is how a hand feels when it plunges into a large jar of honey. The important point is that viscosity is not indicative of a leap that has been made into the honey, but consists of the realization that we are already inside the honey. It envelopes and penetrates our very existence. Intimacy is, I contend, the conceptual tool that can make us make sense of the ongoing contemporary recognition of how we come to be with air. Pursuing this line of thought as my work progresses has allowed for thinking of breath as an important site of inquiry to think with and follow the air outside urban spaces, from cities like Delhi, to work with agricultural operations to understand how traditional livelihood practices are in the recent past being re-understood as environmentally detrimental due to the atmospheres they make and are made by. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Vasundhara. It's right on time. The theoretical halas of the hawalas we need to know a little more, but maybe in the question answer session. Vidya, would you please answer? Do you want to shift this?
Do I need to?
I don't think.
Oh, oh, that's right. The surveillance bit of it. Hi everyone, my name is Vidya. What I'm going to be talking about today is a little bit outdated because this is my PhD work and I've started to think about it as the book rather than the work. So the book is called Speeding Up Sport. It's about technology and the Indian Premier League. Essentially, I am trying to argue that this was an STS PhD. I come to STS without any. My first time in JNU in my MPhil was the first time I had heard of social science. It was not something, that a person from a family of engineers and doctors did, and social science was not considered appropriate. And so I was told after a disappointing journalistic stint, I was told that one of the things that you can do is, if no one's going to take you seriously if you don't have a PhD. So if you're going to study the climate, you should go to JNU and, write a PhD about it. So I went to JNU, I made a research proposal on climate change, and I came out with a PhD on cricket. My supervisor is not here, so it's not fun to rib him when he's not, thank you, when he's not in the room. So we can let him know that I did this. So Rohan D'Souza, in the middle of a conversation about climate change, casually said, but aren't you cynical about that? Are you going to make any difference? Are you really going to do something? He said, I have this project. I was thinking about working on cricket. And I think he knew the sort of crazy that I came from. And, well, here we are, speeding up sport. I'm guessing this is how it moves. So, as advertised, the book is about technology and the IPL. It looked a bit blank to put just one book cover on it. So the second one is one that I have a chapter in. And I'm not Meena Gopal or Padma Prakash. But I'm really proud of that because, it's very rare that Sharda Ogra and I share space in a table of contents. So I particularly, I'm a little proud of that. What I do essentially is that I talk about how television or a televised view of cricket creates the sport that we know today, and this technological regime sort of shapes not just the game but also the spectator. What are the technological influxes that have come into cricket since the heyday of the test match, and how theories of consumerism, speed, and even war, because I use Virilio a lot, can do for our understanding of cricket. And sort of this IPL version of it is, if you will forgive the description, only slightly or cosmetically like the cricket that C.L.R. James, for instance, describes in what he calls the golden era of cricket. But this is not about some nostalgia for a bygone era. I'm not trying to say, the IPL is the worst thing in the world. That is not what I was trying to do. The hope was to bring a deeper understanding to what technology can do to and for sport, and what sport can do to and for technologies such as television. So this idea of mediations that are deeply layered between the IPL and ICTs, information and communication technologies, is the primary focus of the book. And I'm actually trying to understand in a very STS way what are the sort of larger and many-sided relationships between society and technology, and how the digital has sort of colonized what we call real life through leisure, through play, and by mediating most of our relationships with this so-called real world. Because I'm doing primarily STS work and did not have a background in social science and lack that sort of undergrad, postgrad training, I shamelessly and liberally have borrowed from every discipline I could. Media studies, sociology, sports studies, and that other thing called South Asia studies. I'm not entirely sure what that is, but you'll find all of that in this if you ever try to read any of this. Now, the IPL has taken cricket, which was a sport that I think was different from every other sport, and essentially made it, to misquote Douglas Adams, almost, but not quite entirely unlike cricket. My point is this: the conversion of the slow 5-day game that sometimes went into 6 days, becoming this blingy, blitzy IPL, is not some organic evolution, but a result of several clear ruptures in the fabric of the game. There has been a complicated overcrowding onto a single platform of otherwise very disparate interests. I mean, look at those pictures there. Bollywood, military technologies, cricket also, there's high finance, there's politics, there's, of course, TV and social media, popular entertainment, advertising, and not surprisingly, the ability to profit from scandal. And all of this becomes possible only on a substrate of ICTs. Cricket is unique. It was unique, and I particularly like this photograph of W.G. Grace because this is not what your average sportsman looks like, right? I mean, the big beard, not quite aerodynamic, not that, the man is not aerodynamic, let's just be honest with cricket, running between the wickets, come on, are you kidding? Cricket was unique because it was the result of the match was not the most important part of the game. When W.G. Grace is playing, the draw was not just an acceptable outcome, but it was also one of the things that was unique about this sport. Ram Guha has called it central to the magic and mystique of cricket. Ashish Nandy has pointed out that victory and defeat are not the clear terms that they are in most other sports. Victory is definitely better than a draw, and a drawn game is better than defeat, but it is more honourable, at least it was, to lose grandly than to succumb to a tame draw. So the result of the game was not a single point in time. It is a process. And people like C.L.R. James have described cricket more as dance or theatre. I've compared it to that, calling it, first and foremost, a dramatic spectacle. He compares this with ballet, opera, theatre. And because it was a technologically unmediated sort of age, it was, and played for 5 days. With the advent of television and other forms of engagement with the game, 2 new forms of cricket have arisen. But also there has been a continuing influx of technological mediation in every aspect. The dressing room, in the training, in the preparation and umpiring, third umpire decision review systems, technological aids such as videographing are now extensively used to shape and mold a cricketer, coaching upcoming cricketers. In fact, one of the coaches I interviewed said that the players are now opting for individual coaches, and these are not for the team. And they do it remotely. So the coach might be sitting in Bombay in the gymkhana, and the players playing, a test match in Australia, and he's on the phone or on the videos of the player are sent, and all of this works to change the fabric of the game in many ways. So I'm saying that what has happened, and one of the things that have really changed is umpiring and Hawkeye and Snickometer, and I'll come to that in a minute. But what has happened is that it has been reshaped and restructured the most dramatically compared to any other sport. We know that there are a lot of sports that include technology now. I mean, tennis, football, all of them have technology. But nothing has been reshaped quite as much as cricket. We literally have 2 new forms of the game that are entirely because of the way that technologies have been deployed. One of the things that has happened is that there is no sport without television. Even the Olympics are only considered a success when the event is held in a time zone that is friendly to Western television audiences. And one of the big ruptures in cricket was this, Kerry Packer's World Series cricket, and Kerry Packer, being the astute businessman that he was the first to see the massive potential of television for cricket, or to put it another way, the massive potential of cricket for television. A keen businessman, I got this, one of the first to recognize the impact and the reach of television. I think he was the first to figure out that you could really sell cricket to an audience that waited on the other side of the television set. He is responsible for pioneering not just the fact that it was televised, but everything that we've now come to take for granted within cricket. Coloured clothing, cameras on both sides of the pitch. You can't even think about cricket without these things now. And most importantly, making individual players into brands. The other thing that TV and particularly cameras managed to do was, and Ashish Nandy talks about this a bit, is to shift the moral centre of the game. I think the use of McDonald's here and Ronald McDonald sitting in the middle of... the first time I saw this image, I didn't see him there at all. And then he sort of jumps out at you creepily as, what is he doing there in the middle of all these, greats. But the shifting of the moral centre is mostly because the umpire is sacrosanct in cricket. The umpire says you're out, you walk. That was the rule. And once you question the decisions of the umpire, you put that under the microscope. What is the on-field umpire doing? Are these decisions right? Are these wrong? They sort of move. They move the morality from the fact that the player had to call a catch. Right? If it's a clean catch, the player said it was a clean catch, and you believe them. So technology puts that, because it shifts that moral center, umpiring becomes one of the most technologically mediated aspects of cricket. The interesting thing, of course, about all these umpiring aids in cricket is that they come into the game with little or no testing. You think about goal line technologies in football, they were extensively tested before being tried out on the field. In cricket, every single one of those things that you saw in the previous slide, snickometer, Hawkeye, hotspot, each one of these come into cricket from broadcast. What happened is that Sky TV and all these other broadcasters decided that this would add value to entertainment. And because they had it, they moved it to umpiring. There was no on-field testing, and they've all moved without us asking the question of whether cricket needs those technologies. Broadcast identified the technologies and cricket simply absorbed them. And the needs and aspirations of broadcast are, some might say, should not always be the same as that of on-field decision making and officiating. So what we've done is we've moved the politics of technology here is that we are not thinking about what it is that cricket needs, but we've thought about what broadcast needs were in that point of some some producer, and we've moved it onto on-field cricketing. This is a particularly favorite image of mine, and I use it a lot I don't think I've ever made a presentation about my PhD in which I have not used this picture. Paul Virilio argues that those absent from the stadium are the ones for who now televised sport is built. The spectator, who is at the center of the sporting spectacle, is not there in the stadium. It is for those eyeballs that the spectacle exists. But the first ring of spectators at a sporting event are those within the stadium, and they are also now a part of the spectacle of television itself. The watching crowd now exists in what Virilio calls the city of the instant, and encompasses the entire group of people around the world who are watching. It could be on TVs, on mobile phones, computers, laptops, second screens, third screens. This displaced, non-homogeneous crowd is the target audience now for cricket. And you cannot build this edifice without ICTs. The substrate of all of this is information and communication technologies. They bring together online fans on social media, that sort of near continuous engagement of television anchors with content generated by users and fans. You will see on most broadcasts there will be a sort of live Twitter feed on the side, which is as much part of the screen as the game itself. So essentially, the larger point that I'm trying to make through this is that the cricket fan has now become constructed both as a spectator and a consumer. Because what you're doing is you're consuming all of the, not just the television, the 5 minutes more, got it. I have only 2 more slides. You're constructing the spectator as a consumer because you're buying not just the TV, the product of the TV itself, the channel, you're buying the ads, the lifestyle that they're advertising through the IPL, which is not meant for a sort of general working class audience anymore. Cricket, as the IPL, is very specifically catered to a higher economic strata. Okay, I will quickly go through this idea that so cricket, unlike other club-based sports, club cricket is important. There is a lot of there's a lot of interest in club cricket, but as a sort of larger interest, I did not interview anyone who didn't say that the team they rooted for. What team do you root for? They looked at me as if I was some strange person asking a very obvious question, and they said India, of course. And this is after the IPL has been around for 5-6 years when I was doing my fieldwork, and everyone said obviously the team. What is your favorite rivalry? India, Pakistan. This was about 90%. Some people may have said South Africa, some people may have said West Indies. Those who remember the old good old times said West Indies. Some people said Australia, but everyone said large majority was India, Pakistan. So the national team becomes very important, but the IPL is a reworking of that sort of national identity. And as Gideon Hay, who's one of my favorite contemporary cricket writers, Gideon Hay said to me, the IPL was put together so that India would never lose. Indian fans are mercurial. Your team wins, they're gods. They lose, you go and pelt stones at their house. But the IPL was a format in which India would never lose. You harness the advertising potential, the eyeballs that the subcontinental cricket gives you. And what he says is that what happened was in 2007, India and Pakistan both crashed out of the World Cup. And that World Cup, which was held in West Indies, was a financial disaster. Nobody watched the final. I can't even remember who played it anymore. But what happened after that was Lalit Modi went around saying, here's a game where India will never lose. You have everything you need. You have all the great players. You have everyone from all over the world. And India doesn't lose. And that's the essence of it. Essentially, the IPL is what I call a sporting entertainment complex. It has transformed that sort of sedately paced test match into this action sequence that is the IPL, and it has been carefully and deliberately crafted as a platform. I'm just going to say one other thing and then I'll stop. The fact is that it has become this, and this word keeps coming up, not just in cricket writing, in conversations with people, the word is a tamasha. The fact that cricket becomes a tamasha where it is peppered with controversy. I mean, think about the gossip around, Srisanth slapping Harbhajan Singh, Virat Kohli's then girlfriend, now wife, showing up at a match. Shah Rukh Khan has a altercation with a guard at Wankhede. All of this is grist to the mill that is the IPL, designed to catch the attention of the non-traditional cricket fan. It is, you want to go to the stadium for the drinks and the food and, a post office sort of quick 3-hour. It's like watching a movie, and Lalit Modi has tweeted this, right? It was about creating something that would rival reality television. And so what you're doing is you're encouraging the cricket fan to embrace this other parallel identity. It's become the same thing. The consumer, the spectator, the citizen who always roots for India, all of these categories are becoming quickly sort of confused within one another. So you can root as much for the commodities you like. People who supported Chennai Super Kings in Delhi had no idea, did not think that they were loyal to Chennai. They were loyal to Dhoni. Those who supported Kolkata were like, we are fans of Shah Rukh Khan. So that sensibility of what is it that you're rooting for with cricket changes the idea of the consumer spectator. All right, I'll stop here. Thank you. Recording mic.
Oh, this one.
This.
It feels actually really nice to go after two excellent presentations, and also to feel that my own work, I think, dovetails significantly with especially what Vasundhara presented earlier. Before I begin, I want to thank Professor Madhulika for inviting me to be a part of this panel, because it's also made me think a lot about my own work. I'm going to be talking about agriculture, pesticides and farming here. So a different set of fields altogether. But the title of my presentation is Agency in the Anthropocene, Humans, Non-Humans and the Web of Life. I'll perhaps possibly begin by simply talking a bit about my own trajectory. Why is it that I'm here, and why am I asking very specific theoretical questions? I don't have any very clear-cut answers here, but I would like to present my own thought process in grappling with how to make sense of what I've been seeing in the field. I actually came originally from the world of ICTs. I began more than 20 plus years ago trying to figure out how we can take computers at that time to rural areas, and what can computers do for people in villages. This was the whole digital divide, bridging the digital divide sort of logic. And so it was a very much technocentric kind of way of looking at the world. And I went to these rural spaces, and then I collided with the social, with caste, class, gender, all the rest of it. And it was like, well, technology has no place here. Whatever technology is doing in these spaces is entirely mediated by the social. Who gets to use the computers, who gets to install them, who gets to decide what's on them. Power became very, very important in trying to understand what's going on in the space between technology and society. And history became very important. What have been the historical trajectories of people and places, bringing them to specific points of time. Technology was sort of coming embedded within all of that. Technology didn't exist outside of any of it. And then as I tried to grapple with this sort of the relationship between technology and society, and I got into my fieldwork, which was in rural areas. I sort of began to understand that to understand the rural, one really needs to understand agriculture. Farming is what shapes people's lives in rural spaces. And then to understand farming, suddenly I was sort of drawn into specific places, into things again, into plants, animals, earthworms, insects, pesticides, bottles, chemicals, and people's bodies. And suddenly I was like, okay, now I'm in a completely different territory. How does one make sense of these kinds of things? And it's taken me a while to sort of figure out how to make sense of the specific entanglements, as I call them, that I saw in the field. And so I'll, give 2 or 3 examples of the questions that sort of are still with me, that germinated at the time of my fieldwork doing my PhD. This was in Madhya Pradesh. I was originally looking at how this big company was trying to use information technology to enter these agricultural markets. This was ITC at that time, again, about 20 years back. And I ended up looking at how soybean cultivation was transforming this region, because that turned out to be a more dominant actor in shaping people's lives. But what I saw on the one hand were malnourished bodies. I saw people, despite having a lot more money, a lot more income in these places, people being, suffering from all kinds of diseases, but also being highly malnourished. I saw an epidemic of kidney stone disease. And in the last 20 years, the kidney stone disease epidemic has turned into a people are losing kidneys left, right, and center. And this is Western Madhya Pradesh in the Malwa region. And increasingly, we are seeing bodies that are diseased due to pesticides. And for today's presentation, I want to focus on the pesticide part of the question, and also possibly thinking about the future in a different kind of a way. To understand what pesticides are doing to, what these agrochemicals are doing to our bodies, I'll just quickly take hopefully just a minute to describe, and I also want to give a quick shout out to both Naveen and my PhD student Abhigya, whose work has really contributed to our thinking around this particular question of pesticides. And this is in fact coming from her fieldwork. She describes what it means to grow rice, and this is rice around Dadri and Jewar, so just outside Delhi NCR. And I will just list a regular sequence of pesticide use on rice. So when you start with sowing, and at the time of transplantation, you have to use 2 fungicides, mancozeb and carbendazim. Once the plants are transplanted and they are just a little bit, few inches high, weeds start developing, so you need to use 2 herbicides, butachlor, bispiribax sodium. Within about 45 days, your first insects and pests start attacking. These are sucking pests, and so you need to use this neonicotinoid, which is thiamethoxam. I'm also still struggling to pronounce some of these names. In another 45 to 50 days, 3 different insects start coming in, and I will use the colloquial term for this. The first is a patta lapetak, so it's a leaf curl virus. The next is tana chedak, which is stem borer. And then you have the brown plant hopper, which is the bhura fudka. And so you need to use cartap hydrochloride, you need to use hexaconazole, and then you need to use a combination of buprofenzine and acephate. These are organophosphate pesticides, as well as organochlorine pesticides. And then another fungicide comes in because you have neck blast at about 70 to 80 days, and you have foot rot disease around the same time. And so this is propiconazole. Now, this sequence of pesticides that I have listed for you is what is done in the normal course of growing rice. This is normal. Now, depending on what is happening at that particular point of time, with all kinds of variabilities in terms of temperature, in terms of climate, in terms of how much you've been able to irrigate, in terms of humidity levels, this is all happening in the monsoon and the Kharif season, things will change. You may have sucking pests coming later, you may have stem borers coming earlier, you may have other kinds of fungal diseases showing up, which is increasing. And so this sequence may not necessarily work. which means that you have to go left, right, center, figure out what you're trying to do, and then use different sets of chemicals to tackle the situation. And so over different seasons and over different points of time, there is a whole, every time one grows rice, it's a different set of knowledges that come together, different set of actors that one is dealing with, and a different set of chemical responses, or now multiple other kinds of non-chemical responses that people are trying to do to deal and tackle with the situation. Now, on the other hand, I want to just very briefly list when we are looking at studies on human bodies, what is it that we have found in our own bodies, and these human biomonitoring studies, as they are called, are in 3 different categories. And give me a little brief on time, if I can get a bit on 12 minutes or so. You have studies on farmers and farm workers, and of course we found all kinds of chemicals, all of these and many more in their bodies. And the second group of people that have been studied are people with diseases. So we found linkages, or at least quote-unquote correlations of pesticides with cancer, with neurological disorders including Parkinsonism, Alzheimer's, autism, with various kinds of reproductive and endocrine disrupting disorders, with thyroid disease, with diabetes. The list can go on. And then we have a sort of general healthy population that is also being studied to see that if people are not sick and they're not directly spraying these chemicals, what is in their bodies. And we are finding a whole list of things. We've just recently, as part of our own study at IIT Delhi, found 118 pesticide, fungicide, other kind of weedicide chemical residues in a pooled sample of people there. So the kind of chemicalization, if one wants to say, of our environment as well as of our bodies is something that is quite unprecedented at this particular moment in time. And this chemicalization is not... So the question or the challenge here in terms of, linking it back to the point about agency, how does one study this? How does one make sense of this? On the one hand, we have chemicals. On the other hand, we have people, or we have soil, we have water. And one can look at sort of these interrelationships, sort of what is going on. But chemicals are not stable things. Chemicals degrade, chemicals transform, chemicals metabolize, chemicals get stored in fat differently, chemicals get dealt by the kidney differently. When they come out of the urine, you can have not only some pesticides may directly come out, but various kinds of metabolites may come out that have combined with other kinds of things inside the body. They also degrade and transform in soil, they degrade and transform in water. And so we are dealing with a real unstable category that transforms itself over time. How does one make sense of this kind of relationality and movement as scholars who are trying to understand what is happening in agriculture? And for me personally, I am coming at it from a point that how do we move our society or regulation in ways that we can address these questions more fundamentally, to move towards more nutritious, more healthy, better forms of farming, better forms of consuming food. How does one make a case for this kind of transformation? And one of the things, from Vasundhara's presentation was very, very clear that we have to think about non-human agency in very important ways. It's no longer enough as sociologists to simply look at caste, class, and gender and what's happening at the human sort of social discursive level to make sense of the world anymore. We simply can't. And yet at the same time, what kind of tools do we have? What kind of languages do we have to be able to do that? She spoke about the apparatus, and I was thinking in my head, I wrote the word assemblage. I also wrote the word network. What I was hoping to speak a little bit about today was mesh work. But in looking at the agency of the non-human, typically, one of the most sort of now I would say popular ways of looking at it is through Bruno Latour's framework of actor network theory, where non-humans are enrolled as actants into networks, and what is important is not really intention of action. So one of the big debates in sociology has been around what does it mean to act? and when we act or when we talk about agency, is intention an important criteria to understand that somebody is acting? And if something is acting, how do we make sense of that? If things don't have intention, how do we grasp what is the action that is emerging from there? And Latour argues that it is not necessarily about intention at all. It's really effects that we want to understand. So one needs to try and trace associations, and ultimately once we figure out what exactly is the network at play, we want to understand network effects, and action ultimately it becomes a network effect. And yet when one works when one uses this particular framework to understand toxicity and pesticides, what we are dealing with are not discrete entities. It is very difficult to separate out much of the action from what is going on. And so, given the kind of instability, the kind of flow, and the kind of movement, what other options do we have in thinking about agency? And here I wish to discuss very briefly the work of Tim Ingold. And there are also all kinds of critiques about Tim Ingold, but I will just briefly flesh out where I feel it, the particular kind of interventions that he does that perhaps help point towards a different way of thinking about agency. So one of the things that he privileges is the idea of movement and flows of life. Flows of life that come together, where he says that it is that things are moving just as humans are moving. We are constantly, as human beings, we are constantly eating, we are breathing, we are excreting, our cells are reproducing. And so even though we may feel that, there is some entity that exists, human bodies are permeable, human bodies, in some ways, he uses the word leaky. And we are constantly leaking in and out. At the same time, we may think that they are solid and stable, and yet entropy, again going back to laws of physics, for anything to remain in the way it is, a lot of effort and energy needs to be put into that. Otherwise things also degrade, things also dissipate in some ways if one goes back and looks through the laws of entropy. And so if materials leak and if humans leak, and not only do humans have a history, but materials also have a history, how does one focus our questions of agency around this point of becoming, rather than looking at discrete entities and how they may relate to one another, to try and look at the web of life and the flow of life through these particular processes of becoming. And just very briefly, I know I have a minute or two, but one of the important things that is in some senses being collapsed here is this distinction between the subject and the object. There is no more we often talk about, in terms of gender, or, the notions of objectification, and to be able to have a subject position, to be able to speak. And in some ways here, that is the very crucial distinction that is being collapsed. And that has very, very important theoretical implications for how we try and understand the world and make sense of it, and possibly problematic implications. And so how are we able to recognize this leakiness and this web of life that we are all actually a part of? And I mean, I was having a discussion with my students around this, and this notion that even emotions, mental health has become a very, very big issue across academic institutions globally, and especially with the COVID pandemic, and with the number of students taking medications and thinking around questions of dealing with emotions. We had this very interesting discussion on how emotions are also chemical impulses in the brain, and how does one understand the body in terms of actually thoughts and consciousness, or is it just cells and neurotransmitters doing different kinds of things? But I'll just stop with this. But how does one try and look at some of these distinctions and some of these questions. Of course, recognizing, what the social brought for us was a recognition of power and history. Can we think about ontologies differently, but retain our logics and retain our understandings of power and history, which have been the most important contributions in thinking about agency in the field of sociology? I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Naveen, and thank you, Professor Madhulika, for this invitation. I have to say I was a bit surprised by it. I don't classify myself as an STS scholar, so and perhaps that will become a bit more evident as we go on, because I think in terms of my own inquiries into the field and the kinds of things I look at, I call myself a labor sociologist. I've taken the very traditional route of thinking of it through frameworks of gender, caste, class, so on and so forth. But in quite opposition to your way of entry, I kept running into the question of technology. So my PhD work was on the fisheries, and I was looking at processes of transformation over there, where technology, of course, became very central. But what I want to speak of today is more of my contemporary sort of research, which is on the question of location-based platform work, where my entry into this really became from the point of view of technology itself, where I was just trying to understand how do people experience such a heavily technologically mediated form of work. And in my early days of doing this kind of pilot studies around this question, which was in 2018-19, it was really driven by questions of aspiration and what they saw as changing. And of course, there were social questions of caste and gender that shaped this sort of experience. But the technological mediation really became quite central to understand what was really happening here. And so I think I've titled my presentation The Personification of Technology. And really, when I was thinking about that, it was coming at it not from the perspective of technology design and intent in terms of making it a technology that would seem more human-like. I wasn't even thinking about it actually from this point of view of, say, collapsing the subject-object question. Actually, what began to really drive my interest in this was the fact that from 2020 onwards, when you see a large scale of collective action unfolding amongst gig workers, right? So I was looking at various kind of platform workers. I was looking at transport sector, so Ola, Uber workers, food delivery, beauty workers. There was some form of collective action, collective mobilization really playing out. And so the starting point for my inquiry really was to think about how is it that in my field people are constantly talking about the algorithm as having some kind of personification, because they would talk about it being almost like your boss and driving you in to work in a certain kind of way. Their interactions in terms of how the work played out brought them into opposition with consumers who they were providing services to. And yet, in terms of the collective action that was actually unfolding, it really painted a very classical picture of capital-labor relations and antagonism being painted against platform capitalists in a certain kind of way. So, the question then became, how do we explain this, right? How do we explain the fact that despite the fact that this technology makes it seem and appear as though the decisions you are making in the process of work are yours, and a lot of people do articulate it in that way. So despite the fact that you have gamification sort of techniques put into play, by which we mean, you incentivize acting in a certain kind of way, people would respond by saying, this is my own personal greed, my lalach. This was a term that came up quite a bit in my field work, where people would say, my lalach is driving me to work 14 hours, 16 hours, 18 hours a day. And yet at the end of the day, you would come together with your fellow gig workers and protest against the platform. So how do we reconcile these different kinds of experiences that workers were really putting together and using it as a framework to actually charge the platform with responsibility for their work conditions, especially in a field that actually atomizes the workers, that does not have a set workplace. So it defies the logic of all our kind of previous studies on collectivization, on how associational networks get formed between workers, etc. And so as part of these inquiries, what I started focusing on, I think what I felt like I needed to focus on really was the question of control over how workers were really experiencing the question of control. And in terms of like theoretical frameworks, I was drawing, of course, from labor process theory, which is, in sociology, it's been sort of well documented and written about. But one of the difficulties with especially the older literature on labor process theory is that it doesn't really see workers as having much agency, especially in the face of technology. So you are always reacting, in terms of what the technology does and what it requires of you, but it didn't really leave much scope for thinking about how workers might subvert, for instance, how they might resist, aside from ways in which that might get characterized as misbehavior or misconduct in terms of the theoretical literature on this. But there has been more recent use of labor process theory to think about the ways in which control might be applied and understood differently. And this is something that became important for me to document, particularly in the Indian context, because I think while a lot of the global literature, and by that I mean global north kind of literature, was talking about technological and algorithmic control on workers in a certain kind of way, I think what stands out in the fieldwork that you do in India is, of course, that you can't escape questions of caste and gender and how they play out. So it's not just algorithmic forms of control. There are social controls that combine with these technologies to appear on, in terms of the work process, to be exercised on workers' bodies in a particular kind of way. To me, the most stark example of this was actually during the pandemic when food delivery was still going on during periods of lockdown. Platforms uniformly sort of introduced this feature of body temperatures being mapped, and then you could actually see this. So you'd see not only the figure of your delivery partner bringing you the food, but there would be this hovering body temperature around them, right? And of course, body temperature is only collected for the delivery partner. It's never collected for the consumer. So it sets up this kind of relationship to say that, of course, in terms of the pandemic and the kind of threat of who can really give you the virus, it is, of course, the delivery worker and not you as a consumer. Especially with workers then who also enter the site of the home. So, in my interviews with beauty workers, for instance, they spoke about how during this period, very often, not only would they have to comply with the dictates of the platform, which would require you to wear face shields. So remember, beyond masks, we also had that period of wearing face shields and gloves, and you had to take selfies and upload this on the app before you could log in and start your work. But also when they would enter the houses, very often they would be sprayed with sanitizer, right? So consumers exercising their own forms of control. This is a period where a lot of new kinds of disciplining got introduced, separate lifts, separate stairwells for workers to use, right? And all of this has continued on. So in some ways, the period of the pandemic also became important to see what was really happening with this question of control, and to map the ways in which this control, which is both bodily and algorithmic, right, gets amplified, right? And it lasts beyond the pandemic as well. So in many of these residential quarters, for instance, you'll continue to see the fact that there will be separate lifts earmarked for delivery workers to use, right, despite the fact that the immediacy of COVID has sort of gone away. So what allowed for this kind of control to be amplified at this point of time? And what are the ways in which we could actually look at a moment where work that was continuing during the lockdown, so on the one hand you mark it out to be absolutely essential work that must continue, also becomes the period when incomes for gig workers are cut, where work conditions become more stark, and therefore also why collectivization was rising at this point of time. And for this to understand and make sense of this, I found that the literature on social reproductive theory was particularly useful to me. Of course, there's been a lot of writing on questions of gendered work and thinking about the relationship between the economic and social value of work and how you might devalue work. And I thought that was particularly potent and useful for me to think about when I'm looking at gig work, also because it has been extended into other kinds of sectors of work, so not just domestic work, for instance, but there's a lot of writing, for instance, on garment sector work to also look at how the kind of disposability of the worker is created in certain gender terms, caste terms, class terms, and put into place in order to produce this kind of highly informalized subject of the worker. And so I was drawing on that literature to really think about how can I draw a relationship between what we understand to be economic exploitation and social oppression, and what is the correlationship there, and how is it really constituted in the processes of work. And I think bringing these together helped me understand why it was that this entire relationship of antagonism was appearing not vis-a-vis the consumer, but actually in opposition to the platform itself. I think this is also important for us to consider because much of our literature, over the last few decades has told us that, with the rise of service sector work, we are going to see a different kind of political subject being created. And this is a political subject whose modes of resistance are more individualized, where especially in forms of labor that also play out in gig work, where affective labor is involved, the point of contention, because disciplining is happening in a more immediate way vis-a-vis interactions with consumers to whom services are being provided, frictions, antagonisms all play out in this capacity and not in the old traditional sense of capital labor relations, etc. I think these kind of, the instances from the field became a way to rethink those received theoretical understandings about how resistance plays out, how mobilization will occur, ought to occur, etc. And I found myself then going back to some of my, as I said, like some of the classical ways of considering this, which was really to think about, does class become an important aspect of how these relationships are getting defined? And it was interesting to look at the ways in which perceptions about class, self-characterization of class categories were operating, the ways in which mobilization could be imagined. So from very early periods on, where self-organization amongst gig workers were going on, they were saying, they were very keen to emphasize that, do not think of us as part of the larger working classes. We are not going to do union bazi like everyone else. Slowly, as these work conditions become more stark, as the points of control become more severe, as the labor process is making this relationship with the platform more evident, right? Despite the fact that there is this technological mediation at work, it was not some disembodied form of technology. They were directly attributing it to the platform's operation. So there is a figure in mind here, and that figure really was of the platform and how they were sort of operating and exercising control. As that became more evident, these kind of class perceptions, class characteristics also start beginning to change. So I think what has been very interesting to map is to look at the ways in which this mobilization is now taking new forms. So how even the early self-organized collectives that were in some ways uncomfortable with the idea of class politics or trade union forms are now increasingly moving towards those forms of collectivization, where collective action itself is unfolding in absolutely new and fascinating ways using technology itself. So one of the things I haven't gotten a chance to talk about much was really about how social media plays a very big role actually in documenting the workday. Forms like WhatsApp as playing a central role in providing networks and communities of care, but also a very active role in the kind of mobilization that can take place, especially in the face of very real physical threats of coercion and violence that gig workers also face at the hands of platforms. So just to conclude by saying that I think these theoretical frameworks of both social reproduction and labor process theory have been very instructive to my work, and came into this in a very, very different kind of way from how I initially imagined this was going to play out. Because as I said, personification of technology or seeing your app as the boss seemed to imply one thing at first, and then it kind of took on a very different form later. But it continues, it continues to be a source of interest to trace how collective action is playing out within a field that, as I said, does not have a signified, designated workplace, does not have a point of collectivization, and yet there are modes to coming together. Thank you.
Thanks, Gayatri. Thanks to all four of you. You're stuck to your time and fantastic presentations. As usual, I always learn a lot listening to all four of you. We were also interested in trying to, we have around 40 minutes, we're particularly interested in trying to understand the theoretical frames and the methodological frames you use. What are the kind of ways in which it differs from your peers in your disciplinary cultures? Those sort of questions do pick up, but we have the luxury of having Madhulika discuss the 4 papers and push you in particular ways further, I would hope. Madhulika, over to you. So, it's here.
Okay, in fact, I would actually request you, Naveen, to also pitch in with comments, because I have to say that I'm really gobsmacked with all 4 presentations. I was somewhat familiar with some of the work, but not all. And I have to say that the reason we thought of this panel is precisely, I mean, everyone must be thinking that, I mean, this is not a panel actually, this is a round table, for this reason that there's such diverse work happening in what we broadly call STS. And these are all, different kinds of research with some core of technology that they are addressing, that they are using, that they are applying, and core social science question studies, that really the conversations between social sciences and those who are doing STS work need to be fostered. And this seemed to be an ideal space in which we bring the 2 together. We were going to have a captive audience of social scientists and those working in the humanities. And so this seemed like a very good occasion to present 4 completely different kinds of work to this audience, and to see how engagement with the social sciences does take place in the STS field, and also to seek responses, of course, as to how they, what kind of thoughts, what kind of lines of arguments are triggered when this kind of work is encountered by those who see themselves as regular, mainstream, maybe, kind of social science, and not necessarily mainstream, but using the foundational categories and conceptual frameworks of social science. Here I might quickly also just add my place in this whole thing is also completely dubious, and I think that it's very important to acknowledge it right at the beginning, because I was trained as a political scientist with no clue that there was all this work on technology, there was all this. We read very little philosophy of science when we were doing our masters. And so, but we encountered the Bhopal gas tragedy. As a master's student in 1984, I was still studying my master's when it happened. And it hit us like a ton of bricks, because we had no idea what was going on. And Richa, who has worked so much on the Green Revolution and agricultural practices vis-a-vis the Green Revolution, you should know that when it was really, I mean, we knew a little bit about alternatives to, dominant agricultural practices. We knew that there was something wrong with the Green Revolution in the mid-80s, because we were listening to Vandana Shiva as well. She's not part of the curriculum anywhere, but we were listening to her. When Bhopal happened, that's when we all started to see the linkages. So for us, a lot of linkages with technology, what happens, and so on and so forth. I think that I feel a bit like a dinosaur here, because most of the younger people here, their reference points of technology are very different from what we were beginning with. But for us, precisely, what you're talking about today, I was thinking of Bhopal. The fact that the encounter with a revolutionary product was something that just killed people. the breathing in of methyl isocyanate gas, which was supposed to be one of the markers of a pesticide which was meant to increase productivity, etc. You see, so that's one trajectory. But when the poor encounter it unleashed into the atmosphere, then it is nothing but death. So our point of entry into understanding the relationship between, at least my point of entry, between technology and society was this horror of, a lack of regulation on technology. But then very, very quickly we went from there to understanding why, it was so important to understand what Naveen talked about yesterday, that technology is something that needs to be understood as a network of social relations. And Feinberg and others were still people that were not easily, Langdon Winner, someone talked about in the morning, not so easily accessible at that point in time. So for us to string together the meaning of all these things was difficult. But for me, so therefore, an engagement with what seemed clearly a very important question, which was the question of what technology was considered the perfect one for the development paradigm. That technology, when it went awry, and we could see that the development paradigm needed questioning and needed alternatives, could that technological frame also provide alternatives? That was the kind of questions that we began with. But I'm not here to talk about my work, but I wanted to place myself here because this is an amorphous area for us, and I think that's a very good thing. In India, there is no defined STS. We do not have a defined STS, we don't have defined STS programs, so it's not become a discipline by itself. And so, as Richa clearly said, that it is something that is self-consciously transdisciplinary. And that's what comes out in each of the presentations this afternoon, each one of them really exciting and fascinating. Thank you so much for them. What I find interesting is how each of the presentations is so engaged with understanding the technology in its own frame, while clearly articulating what could possibly be the critical frame with which you could understand and explain it. That, methodologically too, I think it's a very important trait that sets apart a lot of STS work. And the fact that you need to engage with the technique for what it stands for, what its grammar is, what its language is, in order to be able to posit an effective critique is a very difficult task, especially because those of us who are seeking to study technology are not necessarily trained in it. So unlike Vidya, who came from a background and she was privileged, but the rest of us, I don't think we were. So I know. But what I'm trying to say is that that defines a methodology in itself, and that's something that's very, very interesting. And so, therefore, even I found Vasundhara's intent to link this very catchy formulation, the havalat, to understanding the technique of mediating with air, and the fact that she calls it our relationship with air, both methodologically as well as analytically, very, very fascinating. And how she uses the understanding of viscosity, which is I would have never imagined that it could possibly be used to understand our relationship with air. I was thinking, because I work with Indian knowledge systems, and there are many people here who do, where air or space is one of the defining elements of the universe, and that plays a very significant role in how we understand air. plays a significant role in the way in which we understand bodies and the way in which we understand, because the body is also made up, one of the 5 elements is air. So how do these things, is there a possibility of bringing these kinds of grammars together to talk to? And that's the kind of question Manindra and many other people are talking about. And that's what makes it fascinating, and I think that there's a conversation here that is possible. Vidya's fun and completely racy, amazing understanding of IPL, because I personally also, like I'm sure many of us, really enjoy. And here again, the dinosaur speaks. So we've seen that transition. I remember the first Kerry Packer matches, and the elders in the family all bemoaning the fact that this is the destruction of cricket and so on, and how that has become. And we've slowly watched how it's become entertainment. But crucially, I mean, I certainly am going to read that book of yours, because how the technology of the media completely transforms the way in which the game is positioned on the field. That is, I think, the backbone of your argument, which is what makes it so interesting. But you're possibly one of the only those who were presenting today that even pointed to the link with finance, with high finance. That's very, very crucial, and something that we need to talk about, because you could not possibly bring what works for broadcasting and how broadcasting sees the future of a game in terms of the marketability of its entertainment form, which without a very important role of high finance. And I think that you cannot be talking about relationship between technology and society without advanced capitalism and how it works. And so I like that reference there. Though of course I'd love to hear more about that. Richa, I was quite stunned by this. I know your other work, but this is your new line of thought, and I was very excited to hear this. You said so many different things which I know that you're sort of trying to build into a comprehensive argument, and that was fascinating. What I take away from this is actually a genuine. Genuine is a very essentialist term. It's a very difficult, actually, bringing together of the character of a chemical, which we see as an intervention, as a technical intervention, which we always see as something outside of us and not part of us, into this framework of understanding our relationship with agency, and the fact that the chemical is a product of a human intervention is one of the hallmarks of the Anthropocene, and that agency is somehow, it's really something that I'll have to think more about to understand exactly how you're bringing the ideas of agency in both between the chemical and the human together. Maybe some questions will come up on that. Gayatri's presentation on the platform economy, I think what I found fascinating is that you were bringing what you yourself call very standard traditional sociological concepts to understand what the platform economy is about, and the relationship between what looks like an algorithm and collective action and mobilization. For a political scientist, this is a fascinating area to understand, and it gives us a sense of agency despite an algorithm. There's so much breastbeating about how algorithms are taking over our ability to negotiate with it, and how overwhelming they are. And indeed, many algorithms are very overwhelming. But this opens up a possibility of looking at how notions of mobilization, notions of contestation, this is about technology, society, hierarchies and contestations. Here we are looking at very interesting, possibilities of contestation that you are picking up from the field. And I find that particularly interesting and exciting. And I really hope that this is work that we see more of, and we'll get to understand some of these interventions and notions of agency better. So that's basically what I would like to say by way of responding. And I think it might be interesting if Naveen would like to add a few things, or should we take questions?
Yeah, maybe
we should just stick to questions. Yeah. Okay. All right. Oh wow. All yours, Naveen. This is your job. Leave it.
Thank you so much. I am Santosh for wonderful panel. So this question is for the panel itself. So I was thinking about the team involved. So he says that whatever we when it comes to agency, we either encounter through materially or discursive in the sense of idea. So when we do this, in some sense we privilege scientific narratives, and it's also like in some way we are giving more advantageous position to global north. So can we, my question is like, can we reverse it? Like, can we think in terms of like more in terms of a spread or say alternative? Yeah, thank you.
Before I invite, if we can keep it as sharp as possible, one, specify whether it's a comment or a question, and whether the question is directed to one person or all four panelists. That would be very useful. Thank you. Proceed.
Yes, thank you, all four of you. Gayatri, in terms of understanding collective action, but just presentation of a phrase like collective action also requires a foundational rethinking in terms of theories of social movement. What is our understanding of the collective? And for example, the very discourse of social movement has been conceptualized in such a way what can be called as self-mobilization is not there. So therefore it requires this kind of foundational rethinking in terms of both theory and practice. Now Richa, in terms of very deep, multidimensional engagement, but some methodological queries, especially as this panel is a kind of STS panel. Now, your engagement with the humans and the non-humans, and through nature and the nature, also misses the dimension of the divine, for example. Therefore, how do we think of agency? Because the idea of the agency is merely techno-practitioner. What is the place of transcendence? Therefore, the STS engagement in this panel and the whole framework, now it still reproduces a kind of Eurocentrism. How can we think about Vigyan and Atmagyan together? Technology is technology as well as technology of self. Thank you.
Well, just it's to Vidya Subramanian. Can I see her? Yeah, okay. To ask a question. So interesting. I'm really delighted to listen. I'm also working on cricket in philosophy, actually. We are not going to describe that. It's so interesting because I thought always that this speeding up of the game from the Test cricket of the 70s to the One Day Internationals and finally to 2020. I thought probably because earlier cricket was not a game of the working class, so the class is always there. And we cannot forget that when cricket was popular, the Test cricket in the 60s or 50s, there was football in Europe. I mean, football obviously, it's a speedy game, and it's for those who don't have much time, and especially the other things are associated because you watch even now in Germany, football with beer. You don't drink red wine when you watch football because it's a spirit drink also for that. So I have one observation. I think from audio commentary, moving into audio visual, that played a major role in that thing, and also this aestheticization of cricket through the visual media. So and there it's a negative to the speed because from the film technique, the focusing and slow motion, and I think every player has in his director this slow motion in his mind because they are like Bollywood stars. Yeah, it might have influenced their body language, especially batting and fielding. Yeah, so they know that it will be telecasted all over the country in a slow motion. So that is one point I want to make. Secondly, the legitimacy of this 2020. When it was introduced, all of us were like who loved the classical test cricket, critical. But finally, when someone like Sunil Gavaskar commenting and without any problem from test cricket to one-day international, and he was the best commentator in 2020 also, still maintaining his old standards of emphasizing the standards, strikes and all. But at the same time, so this kind of course, is influenced by money. That's not about that. But I think these factors played a major role in establishing this.
Thank you. Mine is a comment. I'll keep it short. I think that the question of agency and politicizing agency is profoundly important in the coming together not only of the humanities with the social sciences and technological studies, but also in a very, very practical way when we talk about the climate transition or the digital transition and the way in which big pharma, big tech, and big capital work together. And I think what I want to say is that we really need to look at how our disciplinary inquiries can also situate themselves in a political space. And what I want to say is that we should really probably look at the Latourian framework more or less as looking at the subject-object divide and the construction that there is human agency. But I think to re-signify human agency and look at it as popular sovereignty is very important. We're looking at societal sovereignty, people's sovereignty over technology precisely because ideas of agency and autonomy are now being attributed to things like lethal autonomous weapons. Please note the use of the word autonomous for lethal weapons because they just go strike and cause destruction. Please note also that autonomous self-driven cars are supposed to be displacing human labor and drivers so that people could be driving, and these are peddled in the name of the climate transition. So you're pitting labor value against value generated by the so-called scientific technological community because some people think that it's a good idea to colonize the moon and send things, spacecrafts. What I want to say therefore is without having technological exceptionalism, and without allowing for discourses of the black box of algorithms to really overtake and completely deluge our social imaginations, I think it's extremely important to politicize and re-signify agency and give it the meaning of sovereignty. And that sovereignty is about political decision making, the strategic decision making over technology so that interpretability in algorithms or interpretability of science becomes scrutability of science and scrutability of technology, the scrutability of algorithms. All of these become part of our discourse. My final comment is that it is indeed quite tragic that the large language models that were introduced and the way in which a few companies, just a couple of companies, decided to displace all the small works in Latin America, the small startups, was made possible simply because the venture capitalists decided that it's better to put their weight behind the big guys because that will succeed better. And a lot of startups working on Spanish, Portuguese, and other languages really shut down. And this brings me to the questions around social media, WhatsApp, and solidarity. The tensions and the frictions about capitalism providing a space have to be questioned because it's not as if platforms may be determined in terms of the path dependency of capitalism. It's possible to have solidarities and architectures for platforms to reconfigure platform society in a completely different imaginary, and that is where I think political agency or popular sovereignty is extremely important.
Can I propose that we take this? I've taken down your names also, but can I have the first round of responses from the panelists to Madhulika and 5 questions to Kavin Sujata? And then maybe we can start from you.
I suggest you take questions, otherwise the response they will not have time to.
Okay. That's
limit the questions so that
sure,
yeah, 5 questions.
Sure. Okay.
Otherwise you should not.
Yeah. So 1 minute each.
Yeah, not long question, not long.
I'll start with Mishya. I have a list, so I'm going to put all your names in.
Thank you everyone. Oh my god, such wonderful presentations. I'm so happy to be part of this community as STS scholar as well. And I wanted to basically point out to the absence to an extent of state. And theorizing about the state in some ways. I wouldn't say it's an absence as much as the effect of what technology has done in terms of the kind of individuations that it has, developed. So I want to specifically understand from Vasundhara's, work, if there was whether you see these technologies as kind of taking the place of dissent, the conversation around. Is now as citizens we stop acting as citizens and more as polluted bodies inhaling the air, right? So where is that? And second thing, between Vasundhara's presentation and Richa's presentation, I wanted to also understand whether it's not really the dualism between material and discursive as much as it is about processual understanding of these issues, and that's why there are viscosity, leakages and things like that are coming up. And in terms of Vidya's presentation, I also wanted to know about what it means to theorize nationalism in IBL. That's it. Yeah, thank you.
No long presentation.
Comment, let people ask, but at the end I
Quick. Yeah. So I would like to thank. Just thank to Professor Vidya Subramanian for the amazing presentation and bringing me back from the deep slumber after post-lunch sessions. So I just wanted to ask that you briefly talked about football and cricket as well, right? You talked about goal line technology, and football used to be a working class sport, but then you were talking but not just about goal line technology, but also VAR that is being used in Premier Leagues. That is the lines that are being drawn, and UEFA Champions League use the semi-automated goal line offside technology that tracks, right? So when you say that it is being tested before, and when you say that in cricket it's not tested before, but it is not what cricket needs, but it is what the broadcast or the people needs. I would like to, I would request you to please shed more light upon that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So no thanksgiving, just hard questions, yes.
Just a brief question for Dr. Vidya Subramanian. Again, I really like the talk, but I just wanted to know, so your whole talk was about how technology changes the characteristics of cricket, right, with the IPL. I mean, it's in the name, it's Premier League, it's been taken from the football Premier League. The idea of making clubs in cities, cheerleaders, these are all taken from cultural manifestations of other sports. So how much is the character of IPL about being changed by technology, and how much of it is being changed by meetings with a foreign cultural context with its own history of cultural hegemony, domination, history, power, etc. Thank you.
Quickly. Short question.
My query is essentially directed to Professor Subramanian. So essentially, I want you to comment on two essential aspects. First is probably the divide between the public and the players. So absolutely, IPL has probably democratized the sport in bringing it to smaller screens and bringing it to in terms of the number and the class of people watching the game, and also the probably yes. My question is, once this a greater number of people are watching the sport, and then also this military technology which is being involved in the game, like drones, high security nets, barricades, which are separating the people from the players. So there is a divide. So both literally and figuratively, they are alienated, they are separated from the game. The spectators, and they are made into, profit generators, like in cinema, as Sir said. So they can enjoy it, but they can't touch it. The second aspect which dovetails is...
Can you ask the question?
Yes, so the first aspect was this comment.
I got it.
And second is, this second part actually dovetails the first part. So the involvement of betting apps, and again a bane of science and technology. So the greater involvement of betting apps. On one hand, they provide this prospect of financial liberation for the working class, and also let them break this player and public divide for justice, but also entrap them in further exploitation.
Thank you.
So how does that help? Thank you.
Sorry, thank you.
I have just one question, and if you have time, then answer with both answers.
There is a line.
There is a queue. So please.
When we talk of human agency, we haven't talked of management as a tool. We haven't talked of ethics or social responsibility in all four of them. So that is human intervention. We should not think technology or society or science exist in separation. They exist together in our minds. We have to manage it. That is our part of responsibility. I would like everybody to consider it in their works, how management has influenced the whole work.
So Tanmay almost made the question that I wanted to. But quickly, how I was thinking about it is how betting apps have now, to Vidya, I'm sorry, to add another question to the whole IPL kitty. So technology has changed the very field of cricket, and I mean it both ways, where the audience now is also equally a participant in the sport through betting apps. Dream 11, in fact, was a sponsor of one of the teams itself. So how is this gamification of consumption of cricket itself creating a separate political economy, of informal political economy? So would like you to shed light on that.
Malik?
Yeah. My question is first is for Dr. Richa. Like, I want to know what do you mean when you ask for collapsing of the subject and object divide, because as I see it, more than ever, it's necessary to prop up the subject, because earlier modes of production, at least you knew what domination you faced, so there was a chance to be saved or resist. Now the domination has become invisible. Just a quote, if you could reflect on, I'm under time limit, on biodynamic agriculture founder Ernest Pfeiffer, who says, and this links to food with cognition, volition and appetition. He says, there is a problem of nutrition. The nature of food today doesn't give people the strength to make the spiritual manifest in the physical. The bridge can no longer be created between thinking, will and action. Food plants no longer contain the forces people need. Thank you.
Yeah, my first question to Madam Vasundhara. The way you talked about pollution, air pollution particularly, recently we had experiment of CNG. That was much more hard carcinogenic because small molecules enter in our lungs very easily. They are 2.5 less than size. In petrol and diesel size is bigger one. They can't enter our nostrils. That's the question first. You to Madam Vidya, can you give brief about this? That the way match fixing happened during Kronji Africa. So what is the history of STDs going on? And third one is to Richa. The way we are talking of pollution in this chemical and fertilizer, Batinda in Punjab state, very maximum pollution happening in the water. Most of the farmers suffering from cancer, and diamond train goes from Batinda to Bikaner for chemotherapy. It still is many parts of the world. In India, a lot of Punjab is going on. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to ask Gayatri, can you give us one or two examples of collective action that you're thinking
of? Just a comment. Because creative theory forums have always provided us that political understanding which has come up very clearly throughout the day. Political understanding of technology which makes it most powerful tool, and it has established our understanding to a large extent because it has not only capitalized knowledge but also mediated, controlled, and our interpretation and our perspective, all of that has been controlled by technology today. I just want to comment because we have, through this discussion, actually established justificatory statements that ensures that technology is going to suppress an alternative view. So we need to keep such forums alive because the alternative viewpoint that negates the final truth being monopolized by technology needs to be questioned. Very important. We need to question monopoly of truth by technology, and because that has also appealed to the society to manufacture consent, where state and market economy have aligned themselves, and that has resulted in flourishing of technology.
Thank you very much. This is the last question. Short, 30 seconds. Time's out.
30 seconds.
Yes.
Myself, I'm Kaushik. I'm a student at St. Bert's College, and my question goes out to Richa Kumar, Mrs. Richa Kumar. I'm sorry. I want to know your take on it, because I think you have taken a stand where you do not support the use of pesticides, but rather stand against it. There's an economic concept which says that subsidization of pesticides encourage excessive uses of pesticides. Do you think that is the case with pesticides as well? And also that is the case for, is it impossible for the government to redirect the subsidies which they are applying on chemical subsidies into organic farming?
Thank you. Sorry, there's 5 minutes, there are 4 panelists. I invite them to pick anything which they feel like responding to, 1 minute each.
So I would like to repeat this, that this is the beginning of a long debate that will continue for the entire year now. So we'll have no chance to have engagement.
No, Gayatri.
So thank you for the comments and the questions, and perhaps I should have been clearer in how let me begin with that instance of what I mean by collective action. So essentially looking at ways in which people organize in plan and organize for some form of assertion collectively. And so what I really have in mind are forms of strikes, protests, dharnas in front of like platform company offices, things like that. So when I was talking about it, and I'm going to just use that as a way to just agree with whatever you said, Anita, because I think your message couldn't have been clearer, and that's precisely I think the argument that I'm also trying to make, which is that we are trying to think about ways in which in a field of work where you are essentially being, the larger discourse sort of tells you that technology determines this work in a particular kind of way, that technology becomes the only face of it, so there is no management to speak of, there is nobody else really to address here. Do workers begin to think of themselves as only individually mediating and experiencing this technology, or are there potential ways in which they can think about this as a collective experience? And really what the field was showing me was that they were thinking of themselves, both in terms of individual experiences, but also how they put that together to come together collectively. Increasingly now by adopting terms like a class of gig workers, and that is ways in which they are conceptualizing it, not just within one sector of work, so not just as food delivery workers or Uber drivers or Ola drivers, but rather to think about this as a cross-cutting category. So, Naveen, you had asked earlier about whether there's something that makes your work different from my peers, and I'd say what maybe my point of entry is being very different is the fact that in my work, I look at this across sectors and not just in one particular sector, because I'm interested in how people are thinking about these categories, and really comes down to that question of agency and how we want to understand it. So for me, in thinking about this kind of form of work, I think the question of agency becomes really, really prime and up and central. And we tend to assume that this kind of discourse of technology suggests a way in which there is
a given truth about loss of jobs. There's a given truth about the role that tech corporates will play. A given truth about how things have actually changed. Fundamentally changed. And I think perhaps maybe because of the kind of fieldwork I do, which is on mobilization, I have a bit of hope about all of this, which is to say this is not a monopolization of truth. People are able to see the picture far more clearly. You can understand the ways in which the management is pretty much the face of how this is acting. The platform is very evident, so the algorithm is merely the route in which you experience forms of control and power. And therefore, I think these ideas about displacement of workers, etc., is not really a central question. And here, just to bring in I'm going to stretch my time a little bit to say, I think an instructive part about what is emerging here is that it is not about a fear about loss of jobs. It is about a question about the kind of quality of work that we are really looking at that is emerging at the hands of technology. And I think here the Global South and our theorization and our understanding has a lot to say, because we have a history of informalization of work. We have a history of understanding how informal workers actually organize and protest and recognize the experience of discrimination and exploitation. And I think therefore the way in which we conceptualize what technological mediation in work does, perhaps we have this kind of historical experience to speak from, and maybe it is like the global north that would now have to pay a little bit of attention to what has been really happening here. Thank you.
1 minute is so fun.
Okay, so thank you for all of these wonderful questions. And I mean, I had really ran short of time because I had a lot more things to say. And actually, my point was about bringing in the sacred. Both the questions that I got were about, bringing in the Global South's perspectives. And the other way that I've been trying to look at this is actually through natural farming, or through, there was a question here, that when we are conceptualizing our understanding about what kind of interventions are required in this organic natural farming space, it's not enough to simply look at human agency within that. A lot of the ways of transforming the land and transforming our food requires enrolling or working with non-human agents of all kinds. But how does one make sense of that in a way that brings in, of course, the question of the divine and the sacred? I think that's very, very important. And here I'll simply point to Radhika Govindarajan's work in Uttarakhand on animals in particular and interspecies kinship that can, shed some light on how we can take this forward. But there are, many other interesting questions here that I'm very happy to discuss afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to just club my response. And I'm going to be a bit bold and say that as a social anthropologist, I study the contemporary. If anyone right now studies the contemporary, they must look at the technical and the digital. So this position of STS in conversation with social sciences, I think it's a non-question right now. Because you find how will you locate caste, class, village, tribe, gender, power for me without the technical and the digital in the contemporary. It simply doesn't exist. You find me a village where WhatsApp isn't used, I mean, those times are gone. So that's just one point I want to make. The second point is, you see, in response to all the questions of agency, I'm also going to reinterpret that question. What is interesting for me is the contemporary materialization of agency. And that has, when Latour wrote, at that time, non-human, human was fantastic. But I think those are also redundant categories now, because in using these terms, non-human and human, you're falling back into the trap of dividing the world, right? So everything is, right now in the contemporary is a more than human formation. How is agency being formed through more than human formations? And I would be uncomfortable using the word technology as a singular. There are technologies and technologies. So this global north and global south question, beyond a point, I mean, someone invents something in a lab, something else happens in the field out there. There are technologies and technologies. And the last point I want to make is that state air quality management, Jerry Z's book, Continent and Dust, he looks at how the Chinese government is putting forth their political position through air, right? Or if you look at Timothy Mitchell's Carbon Democracy, there is no separation. This is a non-question, the human and the non-human, the physical and the social. I mean, contemporary theory cannot proceed if we keep going back into those categories. So the digital, the technical, and the social are absolutely together.
That's all.
Fantastic. Thank you, Vasu. Final words, Vidya.
Oh my God. Okay, I'm going to go very quickly through all of this. I should warn everyone I speak fast. Match fixing. I asked 3 cricketers that I interviewed, is there match fixing in cricket? And they all looked at me with a straight face and said, not that I know of. So there is no way for me to say otherwise. Gamification of cricket, betting apps. There were 2 questions about betting apps. I did not even touch the idea of betting apps because that would have required an entire other PhD effort. I will say nothing about them other than the fact that they really, there is a PhD in it. Please somebody do it. Otherwise, I will have to write the next book on betting apps. Betting is illegal in India and it goes on very rampantly. There are very nice ways in which betting, the technologies of betting subvert the use subvert the idea of legality within cricket. But that's all I will say about that for now. I've written social responsibility, but I can't remember what the question was. The question of military technologies and the democratization of the sport, I disagree quite entirely that the IPL has democratized the sport. If anything, the IPL has made it an upper class pursuit. The autowala who drives you to the IPL game at the Firozshah Kotla does not recognize the IPL. It's not built for him. They are not trying to make while it is centered around cities, the cricket within the city does not feed the IPL. The IPL is essentially an elite enterprise in a way that Test cricket, etc. was not. You could go to a stadium for free. You can't do that with the IPL. Okay. Cultural, the character of IPL through technology and not through culture. Yeah, absolutely. They took everything they could from wherever they could. Whether it's the NFL, the EPL, all of these things, but they all translated back into finance. They all translated back. Not the cheerleaders were not brought here as a cultural artifact. They were brought here primarily as a titillation for people who would either watch on the screen or could go to the stadium. They all link back to the big question of money. Nothing in the IPL is cultural. I realize I say this as a cynic about the IPL, but the question of cricket and the question of culture has still now been absolutely secondary to the formation of the IPL. Goal line and VAR. VAR has been tested extensively within game situations, was the point I was trying to make. The testing of broadcast technology, such as Hawkeye, for instance. Hawkeye is doing something with LBWs that has never been seen before. The LBW decision was a judgment call based, and what Hawkeye does in, say, in tennis is measure the trajectory and tell you where the ball is going. But in cricket, it is predicting. It is saying what could possibly have happened. This is technology indulging in conjecture. It is not something, we don't know if this is the accurate way to test it. It was not tested in match conditions. None of these technologies work. Theorized nationalism, there is no way of talking about cricket without talking about politics and the state. When elections were happening, you took the IPL to South Africa or wherever else. There is no, and I've not even said the word Jai Shah yet. So, I mean, come on. Speeding up through audio, visuals, characterizing, yes, all of that is essential. I think the building, that's the whole thing in my book about how the audio commentary built, the image of cricket was built through these several steps, and how that has simply been subverted now through the aesthetization through. But I will say that Hansi Cronje, the match fixing, all of that, had the best fielder in his team. This was before cricketers realized that technology was doing something to them. That man's name is John T. Rhodes. And if you look at how that man was doing catching and what catches look like now, they're two very different things. But more later, if anyone wants to answer.
Thank you. We've had an engaging and generative session. Thank you for organizing this, and thank you for having us. Good evening.